Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three Prakim Rambam, Kilchois, Meiser, Prakim, Dalid, Hey, and Vav, and we are starting with the fourth chapter. So as we began in the series, we learned both the second chapter about the concept of Oinus HaMaisris, prior to which B'chlal there's no obligation. After Oinus HaMaisris, even though a person may not consume any produce in a way that halacha calls it in a permanent meal, achilas ara, achilas keva, but a person is still allowed to have achilas arai. Elama, what do you have to have? So we gemar malach. Then we learned, on top of that, in the third chapter, that when is gemar malach the final step? If someone is planning to sell the produce out on the market, but if a person is planning to bring the produce at home, Gemar Malacha is not enough. After Gemar Malacha, you have to have Kvius Lemaiser. I'm just going quickly recapping. What is Kvius Lemaiser? So we learned in the third chapter in Pei Gimel, Halacha Gimel, one of the following six things. And just to review them: bringing it into the house, making a transaction, subjecting the food to fire, salting it, separating Truba, or Shabbos, meaning the commencement of Shabbos. So what we will have today is that in the fourth chapter, we're going to define better the meaning of bringing it into the house, how that is Koveya Lamaiser. We're going to have in the fifth chapter that Rambam is going to elaborate the other five of the six. But it's amazing that this chapter, the whole chapter, will be only about the Hachnosas Labayis, or the Iyas Penei Habayis, or Habayis, which is again Koveya Lamaiser, even after Gemar Malacha. If a person is bringing the produce home, this chapter has 18 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. Based on the pasuk in Parshas Kisavai, that a person makes a declaration twice in the cycle of 7 years after the person separated and gave all of the trumas u'maisres. The person says, "Bi'arti hakodesh." I removed the kodesh. This is referring to all trumas u'maisres, and he says the words min habayis, gavaldik. In other words, we learned from over here that you're only chayiv once it entered the house. Now let's define what does it mean to bring produce into the house. That's only if you brought it into and you brought it through the gate of the house. It's called shar, means deles habayis. How do we know that? Because since it says that you will eat it in sha'arecha, the sha'arecha does not mean said in the gates, in the entrance of the old city. Sha'arecha means in your home. The Torah uses the word sha'arecha for home. But if a person brings the produce or the fruits, the product, whatever food product, into the house, but he brought it through a skylight, onto the roof, into the window, or if it went through karfifis, it went through a yard, didn't go through the normal entrance of the house. Listen to this, guys. Halacha Beis says that Rambam Yeroeli she'ein lokin min ha'Torah al achilas tevel. More than that, says the Rambam, that getting malchus for eating untithed produce is ad sheyikava b'chnisasa lebeisai. Even though we have in the previous halacha remes for that. Abel, however, im nikba b'shar hashisha dvarim shemaninu, as we just quickly enumerated the other five from the six, even though they are also keveya lemaisris, says that Rambam not min ha'Torah. Ein loiken olav alamakas mardus b'divrayim. Chol ha'oichel peiroi shedatoi lo helichem l'shuk achar shenigmana malachton. And therefore, we learned also in the previous chapter that Rambam only introduced kvius lemaiser if you are planning to take it home, right? If you are going to sell it in the market, all you need is oinas ha'maisris, gemar malacha. Says that Rambam, yeah, that's only midrabanan. The need, the ikuf, it has to go into the house. Midoiraisa is always amazing. Okay. Now, aside of just knowing Doiraisa the Rabbanan, you're going to get makas or makas mardus. It's good to know for other dinim. B'chlal, whenever there are doubts, If it's midoraisa, generally we're machmir. When it's midrabanan, we can be lenient. So these are very important klal. Okay, all of this is just an intro into how much is the hachnosas labayis koiveya lamaiser more than the other 5 of the 6. And be'emes midoraisa, everything needs to enter the house. Now, let's define a house. And this is throughout. At least we have a consistent halacha here. Halacha gimel. Bayis she'ein by arba al arba amas. If it doesn't have 4 by 4 amas, which is around 6 by 6 feet, einoi kevei. It's not called a house. V'chein hagagin einam koivin. If a person brings it onto the roof, to leave it on the roof, it's not koiveya. Even though shahabayis shalamato koiveya. That's because the gag is not the bayis. It's a separate location, but that's only the im lo yehoya begag arba amas al arba amas. Ki going shehoya habayis meshupa va'oila ein a poiter min amaiser elo hari agag zek mixes aver habayis. That's amazing. In other words, the moment the roof doesn't have its own independence, chashivus, then it becomes part of the house. It's not nothing. Okay, halacha dalet, hatzirifim, a tipi. No, it's a house without walls. The walls are the roof. Burganim are guard houses. It's a little flimsy guard houses. Bate hakayitz, I know it means a summer home, but it doesn't mean a summer home. It means little sheds. Arba amudim. You take out 4 pillars. And v'tikra al gabem, and you have a roof on top. But there are no walls. What do they call that? It's called a gazebo, I think. Sukkos. We're not speaking about halachic sukkos, but different types of simple, flimsy sukkos. To hang out there, says that Rambam, even though in certain locations people mamash move in there. And not only do they move in there to sleep with a bed, but to have a meal in there, which is what people need when they prepare food. And they have taran goyim. That's like there's an alarm clock. It's another type of simon. Doesn't matter. Eino koivim lamais. V'chein sukas hayotzem hachitzoin. So people that make pots, right? They turn clay into potters, and it was normal for them to build like a double room home. They would live in the inner room, and they would sell their schleide in the outer room. So the outer one is not called a bayis. And even a sukkah sachag, that people mamash live there. They eat there, they sleep there, they do everything there. During Yom Tiv, no, it's called a sukkah. Einam koivim, shekol elu ein dirosam keva. Halacha hey. Hatzirifim v'haburganim. So even though we learned before that these flimsy houses are not koiveya, the Rambam qualifies. If you own this burgan and you brought it in there, for you it's considered a diras keva. When we said that the re'iyas panei habayis is not met if it's such a flimsy house, that's if someone else, not the owner of the house, brought it into that house. Or a Beis HaMedrash, the person that's teaching in there, for him, that's his home. If you remember, the Gemara says that they used to call houses of study Beit Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan lived there. People mamash would live there the whole week. They would come home for Shabbos. Halacha vov. Beis HaKnesses, or Beis HaTalmud, that's a Beis HaMedrash. So then it depends. Im yesh behem beis dira, then it's considered a bayis koivim. Koivim means it establishes the obligation of tithing. The im lav in koivim. Ha ur yorois, stables. The ha oitzorais, storage houses that are in the field. Ha asuyas la muchnas, they are built to store products. Right, to bring things in there, einam koivim. But here also, if there was a room in which people lived, it was made also with a living room, not the living room, an American living room, a bedroom, koivim. Halacha zayin, kishem sha'bayis kevei alamaiser. Oh, this is great. What does bayis mean? Kach hechotzer koivaas lamaiser. This is big. People used to live in their chutzner. The houses were taka very little, and the whole sugya of Bava Basra of Hezekreiyah, it was like the spillover location. I think a chutzner would be what we call today a living room. You have a bedroom, you have a living room. The chutzner was like the living room. That's also called bayis. And therefore, just like we said about the house, if you brought the product into the house through an unusual way, it's not koivas. Same thing by the chutzner. It has to go through the normal way. Then nikbu afapish leichnis l'toich. Now the Rambam has to add a very important qualification. Halacheches. When do we say that the chutzner is really bias and therefore it's koivas? That is what it fixes the obligation of Trumas u'Maasros. That's only kol shahakelim d'shmarim b'toicham. If something is left there, it's, so to say, secured there. Another way of defining a proper chutzner that is equivalent to a house. People are not ashamed of being in there. Chazal say whoever eats in the market is like a dog. Today people lost all their bush. So we're speaking about a place that is private. And when you sit in the chutzner, you don't feel like you're sitting on the street. If a person is sitting on the street, if the person would be a person, they would be ashamed to eat. If a person enters in there, those who are there will tell him, what are you doing here? But all of these are just signs of it being a separated, private living area. Meaning even a chutzner that is shared by two dayorim, or it belongs to two partners. It's also considered private. When? As long as people have to enter, they have to open up a door. And when they leave, they close the door and they lock the door. It doesn't bother me that there are two people there. Since it needs to be open, because otherwise it's closed, and even when they go in there, they then close the door. That's called private, and that type of chutzner is like a bias. Good. Halacha 9. Beishar shel chutzner, a gatehouse to a courtyard. We want to extend the house as much as we could. It's a house. It's the chutzner. Many times when you enter the chutzner, you went through a gatehouse or a achsadra. Achsadra is a location that has 2 or 3 walls. It's more than a gazebo, and it has a roof, or a mirpesa, some sort of porch. We're speaking about a type of porch. Many times in front of these cheap motels, Motel 6. So you have like this porch, and then you enter from the porch into many rooms. They are like a chutzner. Wow. Im hoyser kevas koivin, v'im lav ein koivin. Gewaldig. Okay. In other words, we learned before in halacha ches, if you have a place that's not guarded, it's not safe. If you have this type of porch that doesn't have a door for people that people have to open and close and lock, then it won't be koivas, because a chutzner like that is not koivas. But if it meets the criterion of halacha ches, even though it's not a chutzner, halachically it is like a chutzner. Halacha yud. Shtei chatzei zuluf nemizu, shteihem koivin. Here again, the chiddush is that even though everyone uses the outer one as a passageway to get to the inner way, I don't care if it's private. Sukas hayoyfim zuluf nemizu, which is what we already learned about in halacha dalid. Hapnimi is koivas. But the hachitzoyna ain't kevas, because people do live in the inner one. Like we said, they would sell this chayr in the outer one. But now that Rambam is saying that sukkah in the outer one that people sell their merchandise is very flimsy, which is why it's not kevas. But a proper store, kevas is. That's because a person spends much time in a store. You spend time in a store a lot more than these potters would spend in the outer one, in the outer sukkah. Okay, halacha yudal. Hamoilech peiroisav mimakam lamakim. Afa pishu nichnas behem labatim v'lachatzeres baderech. What pshat you're going in there with your produce. Loy nikbu'u. Elo oichel mehem aray, you can still eat achilas aray, as we have been learning. Until you come to your ultimate destination. Just because when you're traveling through, like today, you stop at a hotel. So what? And you bring your schleira or your private food with you into the hotel. It's not called koivas. And the same thing as bachazira means that if you're making a trip and you're schlepping along your schoida, and on the way you decide, oops, I'm going back home. So the same thing also. Your final destination is your final destination. If you turn back, your final destination is when you come back to your home, and bringing the produce into any other bias is not called achnasas labayis. Halacha yud beis. Excuse me. So you have traveling salesmen. Again, it doesn't mean anything. They're not there as to settle in there. They're just there to sell their schoida. Very good. So when you are a salesman, that's interesting. It's different. The place that you stay overnight is considered your house. Now, Baruch Hashem, I'm not a traveling salesman. It's different. No, it's not a person. You're not a traveling. You're going on a trip. A trip is a lot more temporary. Traveling salesmen, that's where they live. They live on the road. If you live on the road, it means every night you live in another place. That's the way you live. Then it is considered your bias. Halacha Yud Gimel. Maybe te'enim and asada. A person is bringing figs in from the field. La'achlam b'chatzer. You plan to eat it in your yard. What type of yard? A yard that's hapaturim and amaisus. Let's just say a yard that's not guarded. That's the whole point of this chapter. That midoy raisa, or even when you're bringing something home, bringing it into the yard is not called bringing it home. Now, what happens if shachach v'echnisin l'toich habayis? Here's the word. You brought it into the house. Still, hareze muter lo hitzion. V'lechol mehem aray. Anything that's brought into the house without mindfulness is not considered brought into the house. Well, if they're planning to eat it in the chutzner, by mistake they brought it into the house, it did nothing. Similarly, it's crazy. Well, it's not the way we learned before. You're bringing it into the house through the gag. Here it's the opposite. The person plans to put it on the roof. The way you put it on the roof is you decided to go derech habayis somehow. It didn't enter the house. It wasn't meant to be left in the house. Which is guarded, a proper chatzir. Here we say nikvu v'lo yochel ad sheya. So guys, here is the key over here. The shachach v'echnisan lachatzer chaveiroi must be when you brought it into the yard. It was like b'derech shikcha. It was like in the beginning of Yud Beis, beginning of Yud Gimel. Listen, what it must be here. But once you found yourself in the chatzer chaveiroi, you'd made a hachlata. You know what? I'm going to leave it here. And the same thing, by the way, would be if that was what happened in the house. It means if I did not plan to bring it into my house, I'm bringing it into my yard. And in case I had the bag over my shoulder and I walked into my house. So it's not koiveya. If while I'm in my house, he says, oh, I'm already here, I'm going to leave it here, then it is koiveya. The Rambam is machadish that even if that happened, is you changed your mind after it was there, that does have an effect of kaviyus, even if it's b'chatzar chaveiroi. Certainly if it's in your house. That's the pshat in this halacha over here. Every halacha will be like this. The act of bringing it in there by itself is not enough. Havod that is shikha is not enough. But if you change your mind once it's there, then it is. Okay, halacha yud dalid. Chotze shehi nederes. A chotze that has been plowed. Now, what's the chiddush of a chutzner that's being plowed? I'll tell you like this, guys. Let's just quickly recap. Yazelig, any location that is a place where people live, which includes not only a house, but a chutzner, meeting the rules. It's a private place and it's a guarded place, is koivas lamaiser. What happens if you turn your chutzner into a field? That's the case over here. How did you turn it into a field? By the fact that you plowed over your chutzner, thus meant it's no longer a chutzner. It's going to be a place where you plant stuff. Now, it's no longer considered a bias. And therefore, now if produce was brought in there, even to leave it there, it's not koiveya. Ubemeila, you can still eat it. Arai. But that's only v'hu sheyei other ruboy. You plowed the majority of it. Here's the akid. If you plowed less than the majority, then you say it's still a chatzah. Now the im zara ruboy. If you seeded the majority of it, ein oichlem ba arai. That's interesting. Seeding the roiv, not all of it. Seeding the roiv is considered a temporary act, not plowing, guys, not plowing, just seeding, the way I understand. Because if you plowed it, just the act of plowing roiv already turned it into a non-chotzer. But a seeding some...
I don't think it's shach seeding without a plowing, Rabbi.
So I don't understand. It's okay, so you have to help me out over here. It's amazing. If in Zara Ruba,
yeah.
In Zara Ruba, ein oichlem ba'arai. Why ein oichlem ba'arai?
Because you designated by Izriya that specific shetach. Mistama. I don't know.
Okay, I'm reading slowly. Guess. If you plowed roiv without seeding it, why did the Rambam say that it turns into a non-chatzar, turns into a field? Because we say, since you plowed the roiv, mistama, you'll plow all. You'll plow all. But if after plowing roiv, you already seeded it, what does that show? That you're not planning to plow the rest. If you would be plowing the rest, you wouldn't seed it yet. And it used to be a chatzar. So since it used to be a chatzar, roiv is not enough. Roiv is not enough. The little bit keeps the shame chatzar olav. Okay. Same thing. I'm not a ruba. Also, let's go with this understanding, which means that you don't plan to plow all of it, because if you were going to plant, if you were going to put the trees in all of it, then you would have plowed all of it. Very good. Now, what happens if you plant, but you planted ba'oifen that you see you're beautifying your chatzar? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The fact planting it lanoi, planting does nothing. So therefore, you go back to the din of chatzir that was plowed. Hoyel v'hina deres. We go back to that rule. Since you plowed roiv, plowing roiv takes away shem chatzir. Areza oichel aray me'oisani lanois. Okay, halacha tezvav. Guys, the whole thing today, all 3 chapters will be like this detailed. You have to halka. Halacha tezvav. We have enough time. We started early. It's not big parakim today. We started early to go through all this to the best that we could. Te'ena shehi oimedes b'chatzir. A fig tree that's in the chatzir. Oichel achas upater. Okay? So don't forget, guys, Gemar Malacha. Let's go back to Gemar Malacha. Gemar Malacha means when something is properly gathered. When you pick a fruit off the tree one by one by one, that's not called Gemar Malacha. And even though it's in the Chatzir, even though it's in the Bayis, as we learned in this chapter, if you don't have Gemar Malacha, you're also not Mechuyev, which means you can eat out of it. The moment you're Mitzaref, that means you gather them together, that's called Gemar Malacha. You have Re'iyas Panei Abayis because the tree Lechatchila was planted in the Chatzir. Beautiful. Chai v'maiser. Amen dvaram amurim. B'shehoya oimed bakarka. That's why if you're Metzaref, you're Chayiv. Avalim olo l'rosh ha'te'ena. If you climb the tree, even though you're not picking one and eating it, but you sat down up on a tree branch and you're gathering many, you're putting it into your lap. There's Gemar Malacha, yeah, but there's no Re'iyas Panei Habayis. Ooh, but it's in the Chatzir. No. The tree is in the Chatzir, but you're in the air. She'ein aver ha-Chatzir kavei ala ma'aser. Gewaldig. Halacha tezayin. Hoysa oimedes b'Chatzir. And v'noite legina. So this is throughout. We have these questions. If the root, if the ikid, if the trunk is in one location, the branches and the fruits from those branches are in another location. Do you go after the ikid? Do you go after the branch? What do you go after? Guys, the ikid is the past, and the branches and the fruits are the future. That's how simple this. So in our case, you go by the future. You go with the branches. Don't forget, Gina is not Chatzir. Gina is not Koivas. Kidarkoi. How great is that? Not you have Gemar Malacha. Right? Not you have kaviyas lamais. Hois in a toy bagin v'noy to l'chatzer. Ooh, so then I reckon a toy b'chatzer. And what's the issue? The issue is that if you have gemar malacha, and since it's already in the chatzer that has the Riyas Panei HaBayis, then you can't even have aray. The only way out is to make sure there's no gemar malacha. You can't circumvent the Riyas Panei HaBayis, but like we keep on learning, the Riyas Panei HaBayis is together with gemar malacha. How do you prevent it from having gemar malacha? You pick one and eat one. Pick one and eat one. Never gather them together. Here, the ikir is that you don't follow the ikir, you follow the branch. Halacha Yud Zayin. Gefen shina toy b'chatzer, a vine that's planted in a chatzer. Lo yitel es kol eshkol v'yoichal. Because the moment you pick a cluster off the tree, that is called gemar malacha. Ela megarager achas achas. You leave the cluster on the vine and you pick one grape at a time. And v'chein barimain. How crazy is that? Means you leave the pomegranate on the tree, you break the pomegranate open, and you take out the seeds. That's called, there's no gemar malacha. Little is called arimain. Ela poidet es arimain. You divide it on the tree.
Is there an issue that derech achila?
No, it's about gemar malacha and Riyas Panei HaBayis, which is chatzir. You can't even have aray.
Gemar melacha, where stam, for instance, with the pomegranate, with the rimon, where it's not a derech achila. By cluster of anavim, ich verstehst you. It is derech achila, but by pomegranate to break it open while it's still attached to the tree, I'm asking.
Obviously, the issue is not derech achila; it's that gathered. We viewed, then what's the Chazal viewed as a rimoin, not as one fruit. A rimoin, even though everything is in the same klipa, is like a cluster of grapes.
Okay.
And v'oichala pered is a seed. Misham, from the rimoin that's hanging on the tree. Chen ba'avatiyach. Remember gathering. So we learned before gathering is putting it in the basket. By watermelons, they're big melons. You don't put them in a basket. You gather them on the floor together. So how do you make it that it's not gemar malacha? You break it open on the ground. You don't pick it up. You don't lift it up, so to say. If you're eating a cluster of grapes in a gina, and that's not a problem. Why is it not a problem, Yakir? Because even though you pick the cluster off the vine, you have gemar malacha, but there's no Riyas Panei HaBayis. And if there's no Riyas Panei HaBayis, you can eat it aray. But what happens is v'nichnas min hagina lo chatzer, af al pi sheyotza min hachatzer, lo yigman ad sheyaser. Now this, by the way, has to be further elaborated because we also learned in this chapter, remember that if shachach v'yichnisan lo toich beisoy, shachach, not koiveya. Here, but it must be that it wasn't shachach. You brought it into the yard. Then you decided to take it out of the yard. Since when you brought it into the yard, at that moment you were planning to eat it there, that's called, it was Riyas Panei HaBayis. Once it's koivei alamaser, done. Okay. And the final halacha of this chapter, halacha yutches, kuzbar, coriander, she's a roya b'chatzer. Again, the same issue. Now that we said that a chatzer is like a bayis, so how can you snack on it? You can only pick a leaf at a time and eat it. The moment you gather the leaves together, that is the gemar malacha, and you are already in the chatzer, which is kilo. It's an abayis. Okay, moving on now to Perek Chamishi, and as we spoke out in the intro of Perek Shalishi, again, you have to listen. If you're learning a Perek Liyoim, kedai to listen to the little intro we gave him before Perek Revi. Point is that whenever you need, on top of the Gemar Malacha, after the Oinas HaMaisis, when you have to have the Kevius Lamaser, that Rambam Paskin, the Perek Gimel Halacha Gimel, that there are Shisha Devarim, that are Keveya Lamaisers. We learned in the previous chapter all more about the bias, and now we have to cover Mekach, Eish, Melach, Truma, Shabbos. All of these 5 will be covered in this 5th chapter. This chapter has 23 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph. A person purchases, and here's the key: detached produce in order to eat it, not to resell it. Every word here is meduya. Then we say nikbula ma'asim midivreim kamosh ba'arnos. There's many kamosh ba'arnos. If you remember, we also learned, I think it was in Perek Beis, that b'chlal midoy raisa, you're only chayiv. Remember, if you grew your produce in your field for you to eat it, right? We learned in Perek Sheni Halacha Aleph, if you own field and you are growing produce to sell it, b'chlal you're patur min ha'Torah. Not only is the moicher patur, but we also learned that the lekeach is patur. But then with that detail, when is the lekeach patur? Yakir, only if the lekeach bought it achar sheniknu malach. If the lekeach, if the purchaser brought it choidim gemar malacha, the lekeach did the gemar malacha just to bring that, then he's chayiv min ha'Torah. So remember that. Okay. So now that we say that buying it, to act a transaction, now is machayevit. And also, by the Yespnei Abayis, we learned today in Perek Revi, it's machayevit mido oiraisa. That's it. Only in the Yespnei Abayis. All of the other things that we're learning about, all of these five, beginning with mekach, is midrabanan. How do you define a transaction? Now we know Machlekes, Rabbi Yechanan, and Eish Lakish, right? Whether Ma'is koines, whether Meshicha koine, L'kula alma midrabanan, between a Jew and a Jew, you have to have Meshicha. Prior to Meshicha, midrabanan, the sale is not final, even though you get a Mishapara. Okay, these are dinim that we are going to review when we learn the laws of transactions. But Menegea, this din of Kevius, Lamaser, it's not about Meshicha. Here's the key. What is the Mekach? Mishaitin es adamim, guilt. And Afa Pishalei Masha. Wow. Now, what happens in the reverse? So why do you even think the sale happened? Because the purchaser goes into the property of the meicher, and he's separating that which he wants, and he's leaving that which he doesn't want. He's gathering and gathering and gathering, but he didn't give money yet. If he had in mind to buy it, means when he made the Meshicha, it was a Meshicha to buy it, even though he didn't give the money, Ma'aser. But now here's the question. What happens if he changes his mind and he wants to give it back? So the din is, even if he wants to give it back, this Yira Shamayim, he has to separate Maiseres. Hold on. How can he separate Maiseres, Yakir? He doesn't own it. So that which was separated for the Levi, he has to pay for it because he's not going to be giving it back to the owner. He's going to be giving it to a Levi. Beautiful. Halacha base. Halacha Aleph was when you're buying Peiros Telushin. If you buy that which is still attached, but not for you, but l'shalech l'chaveiro l'achila. We have to remember all these details. Loy nikbu, and therefore yesh loy la'echol mehem arai. So that's a big difference. No, it's when is mekach choiveya, when it was already talush. Number two, when you bought it for you. Halacha gimel. Ho'im l'chaveiroi. Hey l'cha iser zeh. Take this coin. The 10 liboy chamesh te'enim. The 10 liboy chamesh te'enim. We're speaking about, guys, that's essential. The te'enim are not yet shaloi nigman amalachton. Has to be. So the din is hareze oichel achas achas upater, like we had on the previous chapter, guys. Remember, we learned even if something is growing in a chatzar ki'ilu bayis, so what? If there's no gemar malacha, you can eat achas achas here also. And b'meila v'im tzedef, then chayv la'aser, because the gathering together is the gemar malacha. You made a transaction. You made a transaction, and it has the second. It has this kiviyus lamas. Hey, locha iser zeba esrim te'enim she'avar li. Was you give the guy a coin, and not give me 5 te'enim, for I will later choose for me 20 te'enim. So fine. Boider achas achas v'oich. Bo eshkol she'avar li. So what did we learn in the previous chapter? The same concept, that as long as you don't pick the eshkol off the tree, off the vine, if you just take off every grape at a time, we got it achas achas v'ilan v'oichel. Berimoin she'averli, same thing. Split the rimoin open on the tree. Guys, we had this in the previous chapter. Whatever we learned in the previous chapter, that just because you have one of these shisha devarim, now we're focusing on a transaction, you have to have gemar malacha. So if you can figure out how not to make the gemar malacha, you can still have at it. We learned in halacha base that if you're lekech v'mechubar lakarka does nothing. No. Because you says I'm paying for that which I'm going to take. In other words, that the chiddush of this halacha is that you word it in a way where the kinyan happens after it's detached. After it's detached, mekach is kreveya. If you have gemar malacha, wow. And you point to it when it's on the tree, or b'shneish koilas elu while it's on the vine, b'shnei demoinim elu, b'shnei avatichem elu. Since you affected the transaction when it's still mechuber, the transaction in itself does nothing. And there, even though you gathered it, your taka gathered it, so you have gemar malacha. So what? Gemar malacha in itself is not enough. You have to have baited kiviyas lamais. Halacha dal. Hamachlevim chaveru. You're making a transaction. It's called in English a barter. That means I'm exchanging my produce for your produce for my produce. Lechol, zel lechol v'zel lechol, which is key, because if it's not zel lechol v'zel lechol, let's go back to halacha beis. The whole thing of buying it, which is koveya, is only if you're doing it for yourself. Everyone is buying it for themselves. Then is shnei nikvul maises. Why? Shaharei lekachai betolush. In other words, it's still attached. The word lekatzois yakir means to reap it. I have my stuff on the tree, you have your stuff on the tree. So right, I have rimonim and you have clusters. We're selling it, we're making the barter agreement when it's attached. The agreement is I will harvest, I will be mekatza, I'll cut off the tree and you'll cut off my tree. Then shnei leinik baru. Because she'ein hamecher kevei adavar shalinik l'relachoi k'moi shebi arnu. That's the pshat. In other words, if it's still attached, there's no gemar malacha. And kiviyos l'maiser is with gemar malacha. Lokach echad peido shehechlev lachilo. So one has produce that's already detached. All they need is to take it and to eat it. The exchange is the other one is going to actually be maktzia. He'll harvest it. He'll reap it. So then one zeh shalakach lachila chayv laaser, v'zeh shalakach laaksois leinikva lamaiser. Halachei. Ha'oy melachaveiroi. Say v'laket l'cha esrim te'ela mishali. Go gather 20 figs of mine. And how is that a sale? Because the guy is saying, I'm allowing you to take or to harvest 20 figs. I'll fill my stomach with your produce. I'm going to have a meal off your cheshbon. Shneim p'turim. Why shneim p'turim? So the guys, everyone has their own reason. The one that's malaket 20 to enim, he is considered the purchaser. Why is he considered the purchaser? Because he's going to have to allow the fig owner to eat from his table. Why is he pater yakir? Because he says valaket. What does valaket mean? Is that he's making that deal when the figs are still attached. If it's still attached, there's no gemar malach. Now the other guy, a different reason. Mamali kireisoi, it's amazing. What does it mean to fill my stomach? 20 figs for one apple, or for 50 apples, or for 20 apples is called a sale. When I have the right to fill my stomach off your table, that's viewed not as a mecher. The guy that's giving up the figs, he's doing it in exchange of. That's called a mecher, because we said in halacha dalid hamachlevim chaveiro is called a mecher. But the one who's getting a meal is keilu he's getting a matana. That's the reason why it's not keveya. She'ein zachalifin kadei shiyah mecher. This is going on the second case. But let's go back to the guy that's getting the 20 figs. He is considered a koina. If he's considered a koina, the only reason why the mekach did not affect kfiyus lamaiser is because the Mekach happened before Gemar Malacha. But if this guy won't eat the figs one by one, but he's going to gather the figs, Yechap, now he made Gemar Malacha. Now that he made Gemar Malacha, he's going to be Chayiv. The guy that's Mamalik Kereisa will always be potter. Now, Mamalik Kereisa, just to make it for the record, Mamalik Kereisa doesn't mean that he can have a Achilas Keva. It means Achilas Arei. And we already defined Achilas Arei. It's not about the quantity, it's about the way you're eating. Achilas Arei is the way we are educated tragically to eat. We're eating the whole day. But we're not eating a meal. We're eating another one, a bite, another. I'm not eating. I'm just having a shtickle flesh. I'm just having a shtickle kugel. I'm just a shtickle this. A nash this. Okay. Halacha vav. Another din, that's the word. V'hamatone. Ein loy kevas b'mecher. B'mecher. Mistama, I'm guessing it's kimecher. I don't know what you have over there in your Rambams. I have a b'mecher. It means kimecher. It has the same meaning, no matter how the gear says. Now, I'm ordered choice over bashuk. And v'amar telu lechem te'elim. Take figs. Take figs is a lashon of a gift. A gift. We just says that a gift is not keveya. So the recipients oichlin upturim, as we just said, she'ena matana kivas. But that's if all you have is the second that we had on Pei Gimel, Allah Gimel, which is Mecca. But im echnisu liboteyem. So it depends. Im roiv ha'am achnisim lobatim. If the minig in that place is that when you own, in our case, this guy owns ta'enim, he owns fig trees. Prior to him taking it to the market to give it as a gift or to sell it, he had already brought it into the house. We followed the roiv, so we have to assume that he took it into the house. If the Amoritz took it into the house, so the iyas penei habayis of the Amoritz was keveya. So the recipients have to be ma'asim. Ve'im roiv ha'am achnisim lashuk. In other words, ein misaknin elo demai. They have to have a suffix. What's the suffix? Shema isar v'achar כך hevi lashuk. And maybe not. And now that you got it as okay. Now ve'im omar tulu lachem achnisu lebatayim. And you know what that means, Yakir? When a guy says, take it and bring it into your houses, it's mashma that he's telling them that I already tithed it. Then, in other words, just because the Amoritz is giving people to understand that he already did it, you guys can take it and take it home. That's the whole word that Rabbi Yochanan made the takana that we don't trust the Amoritz. Now, we didn't learn yet the laws of the Mai, but just for the record, the Mai doesn't mean that we don't rely that the Amoritz did nothing at all. No. We rely that he took off the Truma. We'll learn later, whatever has to be tithe misafik as the Mai has to happen again, even though the Amoritz is giving us to understand that he already was ma'asik. Allah Zajac. Choyishnayim and Omar le'echel. This Amoritz is telling one person toil ve'echel. Toil ve'echel means go and eat it. And the other one he says go and take it into your house. We just says that when he says take it into your house, then you have to be ma'asik with the Mai. So the one who he said toil ve'echel ze'oichel upat. And v'zeh, the one to whom he says, take it into your house, even though it's coming from the same basket, that's the word, that's the rule. Once this is the way the rules are, he's going to be chayiv, not to take off everything, but to take off whatever has to be done to the Mai. Allah ches, v'chein anoshim, shoyoshim b'shar, oy b'chanus, and v'amalehem tulu v'ichlu, hare elu oichlem apturim. However, ubal hashar ubal hachanus, why? Because since it's your store, even though he says teluva uchlu, but it's in your house, it's as if he told you to machnisu lebotechem because shareihem bebotechem. Beautiful. The Rambam is saying this ending of Allah has to explain why the others don't have to do it. Why not? It's in a chanus. Didn't we learn that a chanus is considered a bias only for the bala chanus? But not for the others. For the others, it's not koiveya. Halacha 9, and part of the payment is last. So he's going to pay them by giving them paydays. Oh, now we're going to learn many details. We're going to learn many details in El Cheschides, but during the times where these are workers that are allowed to eat while they are working from what they are working with, what's the chiddush over here, guys? That's the chiddush. That if we would consider the workers to have acquired, then that's a mekach. But since we don't view the right to eat it, shot is that they own it. They don't own it. Elamad, the Torah is allowing them to eat it. It's as if Hashem is saying, God is saying, I own it, and you eat off my table. So they don't acquire it. So you don't have the mekach, you don't have the second of the six. But that is if the balabas told them nothing. They are only eating it because the Torah gave them the right. But in any scenario, where it's amazing that the owner is giving them something beyond what the Torah granted a worker. For example, that your son can eat with you. In other words, he's not giving you right. It's not the Torah gave you the right, but he's adding the son. As payment. Again, we have to go back that the whole din of one having a right to eat from what he's working is in a certain window. He gave them that right beyond that window. So then, why? Because since you have the right to eat only because of the Tanai, so we do consider you, the soichet, eating it because you acquired it. That is called a lekeach. And a lekeach, a mekach, is one of the shisha devarim. Beautiful. Halacha yud. You hire a worker to be menakesh, right, to hoe around olive trees. Hoeing is that they would remove the weeds. And the hisna hapoil sheyechol b'zeisim. So the halacha is, and by the way, again, we're gonna have to learn this over there in these dinim, that when you are hired only to be menakesh, you don't have the rights minatayra to eat. But this guy is giving you the rights. He's telling you can only be menakesh, and I'm giving you the rights to eat the olives. Now we have another word. So this is taka called a purchaser. But don't forget, like the Rambam wrote over here, that the whole din that a mekach is koiveya if it's betolush. Here he did it while it's mechuber. It's another din. Eloma, why is it that by mechuber a mekach is not koiveya? Because there's no gemar malacha. But we keep on learning that once you gather something, that is the gemar malacha. So you have to eat it, but often that you don't gather it. You're homing around the onions. And he allows you to eat other vegetables. Mamash like above. Next, ritla means a litra of zeisim. Oh, amazing. You are doing work in that window where the Torah gives you the right to eat. But chevra, the Torah does not limit how much you can eat. Here, the owner is not giving you more rights. The owner is limiting the rights. And the person agreed to that. The fact, that's the pshat over here. The fact that he agreed with that, and now he's only allowed to eat, that limit, that's already considered a sale. And if it's considered a sale, well, the only mile is that it's a mechuber lekarka. So you can't do a gemar malacha, you can't gather it. So eichel achas achas, v'imtzirav chayv la'aser, poyel v'oichel davar katzov, even though the Torah, the Torah gives you more rights. Him limiting the rights changes everything. She'im tzeiref nikbam. Loy katzatz, but if he didn't give a limit, Elohoy oichel b'din Torah. So the Rambam is saying, since you don't have the kviyos l'maiser, but sorry for oichel kol ma she'yirtze. But don't forget, says the Rambam, that you have shisha devarim. So all we are focusing on is that the mekach is not koiveya if there's no gemar malach. But or in this case, because He didn't make a mekach. Hashem gave it to you. But for who shall I yispais b'melech? As long as you don't dip it in salt. But if you dip this in salt, that is also keveya. When? Only if this gemar malach. Achas muter. Shtaim also. Why? Because of this next of the shisha devarim. Tikvol b'melach. Hashem should help us to remember. This is so good. Because I remember when we learned through this throughout the Gemara, people get confused. They don't know. They get confused with Gemar Malacha, with Kavas Lamaiser. This is so clear. Halacha Yud Beis. A worker, levasim, that's tied. She's working with lower quality figs. Let's learn that pshat. And B'nai Sheva is higher quality figs. Lo yechul b'B'nai Sheva. Why? This is going back to the dinim and Hilchas Chidus, because he's not working with those figs. And if he will, ask with this concept that the worker doesn't acquire, he's eating it ki'ilu mishulchan the oibishter. That's only if he's eating that which the Torah gives him the right to eat. Another detail, in the levasim itself, you have better ones and worse ones. And as long as he has the right to eat the good ones, even though he's holding himself back when he's working with the lower quality of the levasim, to eat from the better quality of the levasim, as long as that's zichsa boy toiram, it's not called acquired. Halacha Yud Gimel Hamoitzi Espayalav Last Islam Halacha Basadem. I'll give you an example, guys. This is not the harvest. Harvesting, we'll learn in Hilchas Chidus, is where the Torah gives you the right. If you are working a job that the beginning and the end is that the produce is still mechuber lakarka, I'll give you an example. Plowing. You have no rights to eat. That was the job. Now, bisman she'ein loy olav mizoynois, doesn't owe you anything. Oichlin min ha'peidah shebasadeh, u'pturim min ha'maiser, u'shlenig min ha'lachton. But avalam yesh le mizoynois. You know, it's part of the payment is that you have the right to eat. Now, not minatoida, you don't have the right to eat when you're working b'shalei b'shas gemar malach, b'tolu, b'mechuber. Hade'elu lo yoichlu, because it's your payment. It's mekach. Hold on. V'afa pishlo enigma malachton. That's a kasha. Hold on. Why not? So here the Rambam writes another. Now we're starting another layer, another knech. Guys, that's the big rule that we're learning over here. You're not allowed to sell produce that is not tithe. And paying a debt is like a sale. Since the owner was meschayiv himself to give the payalim mizoynes, and they're fulfilling that obligation by the workers eating from this. So there's a knas over here. Elo oichlen achas minate eino. That will be okay. It's amazing. In other words, guys, before a product was nikva lamaiser, Chazal allowed for you to pay a debt with tevel. That must be pshat. But if you gathered it, there you go. That's called gemar malacha. So you can't have it from the sal. You cannot have it from the kupa. You can't have it from the muktzeh, from where you set aside that produce, which at sometimes the muktzeh itself is the gemar malacha. Halacha yudalid gavaldik. Now we're moving on to the eish. So we are up to chevra. Let me just go back to Perek Shlishi, Nacham al Chazadim, because now it's going to go quick. So we went through Bayis. That was the last chapter. At Khan, we went through Mekach. Until Halacha Yudalid, we went through Mekach. So what are we up to, guys? Eish. Eish means cooking. We'll see. Eish, Melach, Truma, Shabbos. We have 4 more to go. Ashreinu. So here we go. Echad hamavashal. Whether you're cooking it, whether you're shoylik it, whether you're boiling it, whether you're koivish, whether you're pickling it, right? Kavush kimavushal. Here we have another application of that. Kavei lamaiser. Kavei lamaiser. Avol, what's not considered eish? Smoking. Smoke blocks. Avol ha'ashenes ha'peidos. And you did it achech shiran. You affected it. Now you made the smoking was good. Not for the, harez a Harez a sofek. Good. Halacha tezvav. Hatoimin peidos vadama. If you are burying peidos in the earth, why are you doing it? To preserve it, not to plant it. or if you are you're burying it in straw, or you're burying it in zevel. Oh my God, and it was effective. But that's not called eish. Eish means you made it ready through fire. Not even a suffix. Which is something that people do, right? Mayan is here, chefs. But in other words, the point is that now that you put wine l'taf shel cham, now you cook the yayin. You put oil into a pot, or ve'ilpas, a baking dish. And the point is that these, the tafshel, the kedera, the ilpas was murtachim, they're boiling hot. In other words, the shemen was to make the food better, if you call oily better. But now you ended up cooking the shemen. Nikvola meiser. Mozak yain b'mayin chamin. You did it to water down the wine, but you put it b'mayim chamin nikvola meiser. That if you cooked it lechavana to cook the wine, and there, even if you cooked it in the gas, because here you have the eish. Halacha yud zayin, hashum garlic, ashachlaim and cress, right? V'hachardel is mustard seeds. That you ground it up in the field, b'shemen, you crushed it and mixed it with oil. So that it is nitbu'ula meiser. Why nitbu'ula meiser? Guys, because crushing these items makes them fit to be eaten, and therefore it's considered both gemar melacha, interesting, and it's called a kvius lamaisves. If it's in the cup, you know what? Squeezing the wine in the cup is called cooking, nikba. But if you squeeze it into a tamchoy, what's pshat into a tamchi that this goes straight into other foods? We have the same thing in the Shabbos in another context. You never made it into a distinct entity. It went from oichel to oichel. Here you're salting it, but in the field, that's the whole word. Nikbu. If you salt it in your house, it's nikbu because there's re'iyas b'nei habayis. That's, we're moving on to the salt now. But if you dip each one separately into salt and you eat it, you are potted. You are potted. If you crack open the olives, that's not called gemar malacha potter. When you remove the olives from the storage vat. And now that we said that if melicha achas is not the melicha that is kerveya, so you can be toivel achas with malach v'oichel. Beautiful. But the malach v'nasan lafana, that means you gathered them together. We're back to the gathering together. Chayiv v'chein chocha yoytze mozeh. Halacha yutes. Atoyim peiroisev next. What's the next, guys? If you separated truma. So if you separated peiroisev truma, shetzarich litrem acharei hashniya. If you remember that if a person made an incomplete truma, you have to do it again. But you only have to do it again with the Rabbanan. Why is that? Because midoiraisa, there's no minimum share by truma. So even though you have to take truma off again, since midoiraisa, what you did is effective, that's the other one. That's the fifth of the sixth. Nikbul meiser. And b'meila now, v'lo yochel b'marai. Now you have to take off truma again, because midorabanan you have to take off the 2% be'erech. Now we're going into the final. What's the final of the 6? Shabbos. Peiros. Now don't forget, all of the 6 also need gemar malach. So Peiros and gemar malach done, and the chashcha alem leili Shabbos. And the point is that the Shabbos began. Then nikbu ubemela lo yochel mehem. Not even after Shabbos. Achi ya'aser. Even though it's out there in the field, I'm saying that because if it's in your house, that's something else. Halacha chaf tinoikos, children, shatamnus te'enim l'Shabbos, that they hid figs for Shabbos. When I was a kid, I would hide candies at a cabinet. So kids do, nebach, their candies were the figs. So they hid the figs for Shabbos. V'shakchu la'asron, the kindalach, lo yochlu l'matzoi Shabbos achi ya'asru. Now, guys, here's the word. Be'erev Shabbos, that's what the Rambam is implying, they can eat it. Even though they said it for Shabbos, it's not enough. Once Shabbos commenced, you can't even eat it after Shabbos. Halacha chav beis, te'ena, a fig tree, that was miyuchedes to eat from its produce only on Shabbos. V'likit mimeno kalkala. Here's the word. Lo yochel achi ya'aser, even erev Shabbos. Even erev Shabbos. Even erev Shabbos. Because the ganze tree was designated for Shabbos. In Halacha Chaf Aleph, we said that if the kids set aside the figs for Shabbos, they could eat it out of Shabbos because they're kids. That's the word. So their capacity of being karveya is a little. It's kinderish. Hoylo Pedros Elu Chalom Shabbos, HaShabbos Koivas, even erev Shabbos. And the final halacha of this chapter, halacha of Gimel, Hoyochel be'eshkol. Person is eating off a cluster, and v'chashkol of Leil Shabbos. You would think since you began eating this cluster, ba'oifen hamuter, come on, so I can finish the cluster. No, you cannot. And even if I'm not eating any of it on Shabbos, I set it aside to keep on eating it after Shabbos. That's the word. There's two chidushim. You began eating it beheter. You're not eating it on Shabbos. You designated it for Monday. I'm saying Monday. No, it's not about Sunday. For later. Doesn't matter. Shabbos began. The koyach of Shabbos kodesh. Okay, beautiful. Moving on to today's third chapter for people that learn Perek Echad Layoim Chaver. We're learning Perek Shishi of Hilchos Meiser. We concluded the beautiful first 5 chapters. Now we're going to go to Tevel, and we're going to see how there's an Isur, and there's an Isur Hanof Tevel. There's a Chiv Misa B'dei Shamayim for eating Tevel. We had in the previous chapter, Amid Rabbanan, you can't pay your debts down with Tevel. All about Tevel. This chapter has 22 halachas, beginning with halacha al. Dr. Rambam. Machlikin b'te'enim ba'anavim shel Tevel. We're going right away into details. People would rub the surface of various products that Rambam is focusing on, figs and on grapes. Why would they rub oil on it? Because they wanted for it to look shiny and nice, right? People that live in LA, we understand the sheker of Olam Hazeh. The grape is the same grape. Ooh, it looks shiny. People are going to buy it quicker. Now, what's the issue? Why would it be a problem? What's the chiddush? You could do it because whenever you smear these fruits with oil, you diminish their longevity. One might have thought, since you were not yet toidim u'ma'aser, who gave you the right to do something, that now these grapes, instead of lasting 2 weeks, might only last for 10 days. You are allowed to do it. It's not a problem. Machlikin b'te'enim ba'anavim shel Tevel. But not choishish. That it will spoil slightly faster. But that's the word. The slightly is not enough to justify a isser. What does that mean? For example, min hagarinim. Even though garinim seeds are not the product, it doesn't matter. If you gave grapes to a kohen, once it's truma, a Yisrael cannot even only eat the grapes. The kohen cannot only eat the klipos, the outer peels, the ha'olin or the leaves, or the chatzanim or the seeds. Any part of the fruit that is asur, once it's truma, kach asur la'achlim in hatevel. And that includes meiser that the Rambam already paskin, which is choil, not kodesh. It's property of the Levi, but it could be consumed by any Yisrael. Doesn't matter. Prior for the Levi separating meiser min ha-meiser, it's called mamish tevel. Mamish tevel, misa b'dei shamayim, because there is truma in it. Umin ha-meiser shulanitlum truma soy and meiser sheni outside Yerushalayim, and egdish that wasn't properly nivdu. On the other hand, we had this all in Hilchos Truma. Why would there be parts of this that may be eaten because it's mamish, not food? It's such psoilis that it's not food at all. Then kach muta b'tevel uba'maiser trumasoi uba'maiser sheni or behegdish shaloi nivdu. Beautiful. Halacha beis ein madlikim b'tevel tamei afilu b'chol. Now don't forget, guys, that when truma is tamei, it's mutar b'hana, and the kohen can use it for fuel. You know why? Because it's truma. But if you have tevel, even though it's tummy, that means you're going to be mafresh trumas. The trumas ultimately will be going for fuel. You can't use tevel nekuda. The ein tzarach leimer if you're getting benefit because you're trying to do it tzarech Shabbos. No, it's there you're getting even more hana. But even b'chol, shenemar when it says es mishmeres trumoisai, which means ma truma tohira ein lochaba elam shas haramasa af truma temeya. The kohen even the kohen cannot have ano only mishas harama ve'elach prior to the separation. It's called tevel. Tevel is aser b'hano. Halacha gimel. Ein mechapin b'tevel. Ein mechapin b'tevel. You may not cover tevel with earth in order for it to grow. In order for it to grow, you cannot sow tevel. Person can say, "Listen, I'm not going to eat it anyway." You can't do that. And ve'ein zoyden b'yasat tevel. V'afilu peirush shaloi nigam ramalachton. And after learning all these chapters, we know that koidim gemar melacha yakir after oinas hamaisis. You cannot be koivei yasuuda. You can have aray. If you cannot have kavius, you cannot seed it. Asur lisroya mehem ache yaaser. V'med varam amurim betvua or v'kitniyois v'chayoytze b'hen, where we say that gathering to sow. Because that, guys, the word will be that gathering to sow it will be its gemar melacha. Avol ha'oiker shesalim. If you uprooted saplings that have fruit on it, and you are replanting those saplings, so we don't view that kizarei tevel because you did not gather paytas. Remember, guys, remember one big rule: anytime you gather produce, it's called gemar melacha. So when you are gathering seeds to sow the seeds, that is called the gemar melacha. If you don't have gemar melacha, then we don't call it tevel yet. When you uproot turnips, lefes, or radishes, and you are planting them elsewhere, so the word will be in the schaven lo hoisev big gufan. You did not gather it with intent to reap the produce. You gathered it lechatchila with the intent to replant it, because over there it's going to grow more. That's going to be okay. But if you planted them only for this product to become hardened in order for you to get the seed, then also, because then it's like his reachitim shel tevel, and as the Rambam began, that the tfuah kidneys can never reap even to sow. If you harvested it, you got to be ma'aseh. Halacha daled. Litra ma'aseh tevel. Nothing was separated yet. Shezerah. Guys, the ma'aseh yakir, just to know, ma'aseh means it's ma'aseh. Ma'aseh means it belongs to the Levi, but the Levi did not yet separate trumas ma'aseh or any tevel. Shezerah. And you did it. You shouldn't have, but you did it. You reseeded it. And vishbicha, how much? And now it became 10 times bigger. You seeded 1 liter, and now you have 10 liters. Retolim and liters are the same. Chayav is b'maiser. You already took off maiser. You have to give off maiser from the 10. But v'oisa litra ma'aser oleh mimakam acher lefi cheshben. In other words, you have to separate. You have to separate trumas meiser off the original. What's from the new product? You don't even have meiser. You have to separate meiser edition from the old product. You already had that. That was meiser, but you have to separate trumas meiser. Litra betzalam shetikno zera. Unique by onion.
From where the new master is coming?
In other words, from the 10 itself. From the original, you don't have it.
It was correct.
So you take other produce, menachayev alachayev, and you say that from the litra, I'm giving this as the 10% for that litra. Litra, but some shadik knows it all. Now, another thing, guys, but Salim, we're going to learn a lot about Zarei Kala versus Ein Zarei Kala. We have a lot of Hasidus on this. With certain seeds, they disintegrate. That's the cloud, right? Yesh has to become into an ayin in order for it to become a new yesh. Like, how do you go from a seed into a tree, from a doimim to a tzemeach? It's an infinite leap. It has to become completely bottled. Some items don't disintegrate. So onions do not disintegrate. So when you plant an onion, now the word will be the onions that you were ma'asid, you took off all the trumas omaisis and you put it into the ground. So you would think that if I began with X amount of tithe bitzalim, I only have to separate trumas omaisis from the new Zakt Rambam nisht ela ma'asid kuloi. Beautiful. You know why, Yakir? Because the Tosefes is mevatel the original. Everything is considered new. Which means, listen to the Vart al Pi Chasidus, that if a person is not yet on the level that they have proper bittul, which we should, but the person is doing so many good new things, that light is doicha de chosh. On some level, it's maveh. The old is battle in the new, even though there was no bittul. That's a good thing for all of us because we have an issue with bittul. Our egos are so good that only if, God forbid, we get a zaklap, it's hard to be mavatal ourselves. Halachei. Seroinim sheviyu shlish. And that shlish was what we learned for Bechlal, for Einas Hamaisis. And prior to that, Bechlal, there's nothing to talk about. But it already brought the shlish and Umeirchan. Remember that, guys? Miruach, that's Gemar Melach. And the Isra. You did everything good. And now you see, now the Rambam is going back to what we said, not bitzalim, but other Zayroinim, had a suffix, we're speaking about the original, we did it, we just learned about onions. Because by bitzalim, since ein darkam lihi zara, therefore it's amazing. Therefore they are bottled. But something that's darker lihi zara, the opposite we would think, is suffered. We have to run. Having to run is a good excuse, Yakir, not to understand so good. L'chaim. That you shouldn't have. Since the guy was over, number one, if it did not yet take root, which means you are able to recollect it, even though it's avoid gedoyla, you violated this isur. You know, that's your knas. But if it took root, which means you cannot uproot it, it's post facto, the gedulim are chulin. But that's only hagedulim chulin, Yakir, because Zarei Kolem. I'm sorry. That's only if Zarei Kolem, because the bottom line is that the old is no longer. But Zarei Kolem, afilu gedulim asurim. When does it become bottle? Even three, only the fourth time. Because and it's not bottled. Next then. And even when there's a tzorech, only to a chaver. Because you know we have maybe the guy is not going to take of Trumas U'Maasros. A chaver will. But also l'shleich hatevel, l'shleich means as a matana. Afilu chaver l'chaver shema yis mechuzal zeh. And even the chaver, a gift, he'll think, the guy only sent me the gift because it was already tied. Sale l'tzoyrech is okay. Halacha is zay. Amoicha peres l'chaveiroi. And after he sold it, it was tevel. We just don't, you're not allowed to do that. That's it. So then it's too late. But the im safik shem kayomim kayomim. So tzarech lohoitzer aleya masruseim mi peres acherois. Halachiches hamoicha peres lachaveiroi. Hamoicha peres lachaveiroi. Moicher oimer amanal shem tevel macharti. I know I'm not allowed to do it, but I'm letting you know it's tevel. The lekech says no. I only bought it because I assumed that you did you're keeping the halachas that they are already miusadim. Sagt der Rambam, koifen es hamoicher l'sake, knasu l'shomach l'satevel. Normally, what do we say? Yakir hamoitz mechaver olavarayim. Halachetes ein koin l'chayven hatevel, because that is like kemoichroi. Halacha yud mi shalakhu beis hamelech esperosav, the government, the IRS, seized your paydois and their tavalim. So what now? If machmas choyf chayiv lahem, well, you're not allowed to pay your debt with tevel just because they seized it, but they rightfully seized it. You owe them. Then sorach loitzi alei maisris memakam as we look. Ve'im lakom ba'inus. If they took it, shaloi kedim, ein chayiv la'asar aleim. Halacha yudalev halikeach tevel. Mishnei mekoimois ma'aser mizeh al zeh. What's the chiddush? I'll tell you the chiddush. Because you cannot be toirim u'ma'aser mishana zu l'shana acheres. You can assume that the produce that you brought from two different places grew on the same halachic year. Gewaldig. Next, hamakabel sodam Yisrael oimen anachri. Now we're going to learn a lot of dinim of a person who made a sharecropping agreement. That means, guys, there are three types of agreements. Number one is
the malikirsi, no? He gives him the parcel and he says, work it out and I'm going to be able to eat.
Very good, very good. So I guess, let's go. Makabel. Makabel means that I'm not going to, you're the owner, Yakir, I'm the worker. I'm not paying you a fixed amount. I'm going to pay you a percent of what grows. That's called makabel. Choicher means I'm going to pay you produce, but a fixed amount of produce. And a soicher means I'm giving you geld. So let's go. Makabel, so if the owner is a yid, or even if the owner is a goy, choilik v'noisen l'bala asad shalafanov, k'dei sheyeh the shetevel notal. We just said that what I cannot pay my debts with tevel. So how do we view this division? We don't view that the makabel gets it all, and he made up to give 50% to the owner. He's not paying his debt. He's lechatchila leaving the 50% for the owner. He's not paying it with tevel. But Yisrael, since he has to pay him a certain amount of produce, if he's paying with the produce that grew in that field, then he has to first be toidim, and only then it's amazing. Yeah, listen, one second. Truma, he has to separate. Balasada will take off Meiser by himself. Amazing. That is only, these are the rules. But if he's paying him the chachira produce, misada acheres, or mimin acher, not only does the worker have to take off trumos, he also has to take off meisres. Let's go flying.
What's the agreement by the makabel? What's the percentage for it to be a makabel?
That makes no difference. It's just that he's only paying from what grows and a percent. A choicher says, I'm paying you 10 pounds. And which means if you don't have 10 pounds, I'll have to buy it from elsewhere. Question is why? Well, what's the issue? The guy is not obligated in any of this. I'll tell you why. Because Chazal, this is in Eretz Yisrael. Chazal don't want for Yidden to be choichers for goyim. You know why not? Because if no one is going to work on the fields, what are they going to do? They're going to sell it. And another Yid is going to buy it. And that's part of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. So ma'aser v'chakach noisloi. Knas konsu oisem b'zeh. K'dei shelo yachkoid min hagoy. Why do they want for no one to work for the goy? V'nimtzas asad bura lefanav. Ad sheyitztarech v'imkerenu liYisrael. Chein kabel stay avois of min hagoy. Listen, the goy seized a sodom, the koyach, wrongfully from a Jew. What field? The field that the Yid inherited from his ancestors. Why? Because again, we don't want for goyim to seize property. Again, we want for him never to get anyone to work. If he won't get anyone to work, the chiddush here is that even though the Yid is going to say, come on, it's my field. Let me work on my field. I'm connected to it. Don't do that. Which also means that if I have to give a larger amount as payment, and this field only made muad, I'll have to pay him from produce from another field. It doesn't matter where it grew. But a makabel, which is sometimes what we call an aris, who shehu makabel oisa bechelik memashatas, whatever amount, more or less, chetzyoy, shlishoy, oy mashiyasnu mineim. And the soichet is geld. Geld, who shesoichet akarka memois. Alocha yudalid, shnaim shekiblu sadavar isus, two people together, oy sheyarshu, oy shenishtatfu. I'm not allowed to pay my debt with tevel. So it says that Rambam it's not called an exchange. It's not called a sale. You take chitim and I take soirim. That's called an exchange. That's called a barter. Because that's called selling tevel. Halacha tezvav koino levi shalokhu peiros mi Yisrael achar shenigmaram alachton. But what? But before trumos u'maisris were separated. Moitzian as a truma v'maisris miyadeyem. They can't even keep it. Why can they not keep it? Because if they won't have to give it to other people, they're going to go to a yid and tell them, you know what? Don't bother. Sell it to us now, and we'll keep it for ourselves. They're going to take work off the owner, and people are going to get used to not being trained on ma'aser. Can't do that. Not the im, but if they bought it, then even though it's not ideal, they have to separate. They have to separate Yakir. We learned that in Perek Sheni that a lekeach that buys it koidim gemar malacha makes the gemar malachas chayiv, but they can separate it and keep it for themselves. Halacha tezayin koin levi that they sold Perek Solution liyisrael koidim shetigomer malachton. So the din is, listen to this, guys. Harei hatruma oy hamaiser shelohen. Mistame, the Kohanim and the Leviim had in mind, you are going to separate it and you're going to give it back to us. But then he can give it to anyone who he wants. They're both an artist. And he gives it to any kind of Levi that he wants. But let's reverse it now. A Yid, he is the artist, and the field belongs to the Kohen or for a Levi. Listen to this, guys. Wow. And only the Shad HaMatana is Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is not designated for a Kohen or a Levi. Meiser Ani, Cholkin. Halacha Yutches. Amakabel Zeisim Lohitzim Mehem Shemen. That's the sheer cropper agreement. Bein Yisrael Mikoyen, or Yisrael from a Levi, or a Kohen or Levi mi Yisrael. Shem Shecholkin Bachulin Kalcholkin Trumaso Maisres. In other words, the Makabel is not going to be Mevater to give up his chelik, even though he's not keeping it, but he wants to be able to give it to whoever he wants to give it. Sale, listen to this. Listen to this guy, Yakir. And he tells the Jew, will always be mine. Always be mine. Means even if you're going to sell it to someone else, I'm retaining it for me forever. It's not davar shalei b'lo olam because he's retaining the rights in the field for that kilo. Hadehen, indeed, shalei, it's effective. Kivan sh'amar al manas, nasa kibish shir makem ha'maiser. You need to have the makem ha'maiser because if not, it's davar shalei b'lo olam. Now, but it's only the original owner. He only kept it for him. But if the original owner passed away, his son does not inherit that. But if he tells him amanash ha'maiser li ulavani meisu, Al-Manasha Meister Shali calls man shehila fanecha, then only the first lekeach has to give it back to the original owner. But if the first lekeach sells it to the second lekeach, yichap mochar la'acher al-Afa pisha chazer v'lakcha ein lakoyin oiser meisres halacha chav Yisrael shekibol sanam mekoyin Levi v'amaloi the yid the worker al-Manasha Meister Shali arba ichamesh shanim ha. And we said, Meiser is chulin. Mutter. If Amanashim shloilam asur. Because keeping it forever, it's ki'ilu, he's becoming a kohen. Amazing halachas. V'chein ben Levi. Shoyal choyev li Yisrael. The Levi owed a yid money. He owed a yid money. Lo yeh Yisrael said, goyvem acherim amafresh at shipar keneged choyev. The yid cannot collect Meiser Rishon and count down. She'ein Levi zeh oiseb al choyev shaloi ke Levi yacher. To giving him the right, sheyigba meiser machedim, you cannot do that. Allah of Aleph, Yisrael sheyarash tevel mimoirach Here we go, guys. Just to know, there's Dina Yerusha, and there's times that a Yid will bequeath to a Kohen, or a Kohen can bequeath to a Yisrael. Because if a Kohen has a daughter who married a Yisrael, and they have a son, the only child is the daughter, and the daughter dies, and then she leaves the son, and then the Zayda dies, it goes. So it began from a Yid. We're speaking about Gemar Malacha produce. It went down to a Kohen, and then it went down to a Yisrael. So the vort is like this: you have to separate Trumas U'Maasros because it's Gemar Malacha, but you get to keep it because you own it. Now you can't eat it; sell it to a Kohen. So the uyois lihitorim is kamay shehur muhain, and therefore you yarshined it, even though it wasn't hurmu. You have to be toidim it, but you get to keep it. Beautiful. The final halach of this chapter, halach of base. Anoisen so they the goy. The Yid owns it, and the goy is the sharecropper or anyone else who's not believed to have separated maasros. Listen to these words. Wow. Even though the goy doesn't have to separate Trumas U'Maasros. And why is that? Guys, this is a knas. This is a knas. Not to have a goy or someone who's not neman on maasros work with produce, because they might end up passing on tevel to other yid. That's the knas. The son of aretz. So here it depends. But the moment that it comes to oines hamaasros, tzarich la'aser al yodon. How do you do that? This is before the division of the produce is made. The noitel. Because and you fulfilled your knas with that chevra to be continued. Wow.